Hello again, and welcome to this edition of Canadian Genius. Today I thought I would go to a little bit more of a common problem topic, but stuff that other people just don't want to talk about. And so I thought I would introduce the topic of depression today. Now, I think it's important to realize that there is a vast misinterpretation about depression and what it means, because we tend to look at any emotion as bad, so anytime somebody's sad, we say they're depressed. But that's not what depressed is. Depressed is much, much bigger than that. It's not just because you're sad. I mean, if you go through a breakup and you're feeling really, 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 really sad, you're still not depressed. You're just really sad. And that's okay. And unfortunately, there are a lot of people that in that situation will actually go and seek out drugs to get rid of that feeling. And that's one of the reasons I want to talk about this, is because there's a lot more we can do to control those emotions and then not get overwhelmed by them. And with emotion, it is our interplay with it that determines how powerful they are. As I said, with fake emotions, they have to be overwhelming. Well, if you look at one of the elements of why that is like I said before, because you have to hide your real emotions, but it's also your interaction with that emotion, right? Is that if you look at emotion as being negative, which we all tend to do, then when it kicks in, it's bad. Even the fake version gets that sort of tag of bad attached to it, so it has to be even bigger. And so, of course, when we hit a sad situation, then, of course, that big, overwhelming emotion becomes even bigger and overwhelming even more. But that's because we weren't prepared to accept that it even existed. We weren't even prepared to admit that we were sad, let alone more. But depression itself is actually, I think it's best to break it down into two different versions. I like to call them situational depression and chemical depression, or neurochemical depression, right? Neurochemical depression is the one that everybody assumes they have, right? Which means that there's a chemical imbalance in your head, and no matter what you do, you can't change that without outside help. Situational depression is a lot more common. It's the one that everybody typically has, but not everybody. And it's based entirely on the whole situation they find themselves in. A perfect example is that depression very often goes with poverty, right? Because you have no money, you have no opportunities, you have no good job, all this stuff, right? All these things that we associate with being successful, you don't have. And then you live that life for a long period of time, it creates this negative cycle of sadness and unacceptability that just cycles and cycles and cycles and cycles, and we become depressed. The reason I call it situational, though, is because if all of a sudden your situation changed, the depression would go with it, right? And so if we look at that and try and treat situational depression as neurochemical depression, then of course it's not going to work because there is no neurochemical component to it. But if we think that real depression is situational and don't do anything, then that's not going to work, because if our neurochemicals are out of balance, the only way to get them back into balance is through introduction of those neurochemicals or something else that triggers them, right? Which is what most of the depression meds do, is they either recreate the same transmitters or they help the production of those transmitters. It just depends on how they're working. So to do that, we have to really understand more about depression. And like I said before, if we're not prepared to feel, if we're not willing to accept our situation, if we're not prepared to deal with reality, then how can we ever hope to deal with reality, right? So that's why I thought it was good to do it kind of at this point in the series and not before, because everybody sort of needs to learn that you have a lot more control of your life than you realize. I always kind of make the joke that life is what you make of it, so why not make it fun? But everybody thinks that their situation is out of their control, but it's not. It's just, more often than not, our situations are the way we are because of our acceptance of them, or more accurately, our apathy towards them. Because we don't think about them, we don't talk about them, we don't deal with them, we don't investigate them, we don't counter them, we don't try and change them. So it's just like, whatever. And in a sense, we accept them and we say, okay, it's mine. And we take that role and we never, ever, ever change it. As an example, I used to work in food service years and years ago. And it always blew my mind how much the servers were so terrified of losing their jobs. As if they lose their job and they would never get another one. And yet, that's an industry where people typically change jobs all the time. If you lose a job, walk across the street and say, hey, I need a job, I got 10 years experience, you're hired. Because that's what they're looking for, right? And it just blew my mind how many opportunities that they would miss because, when they started at this job, maybe they had 2 years of experience. Now they've got 5 years of experience. So now going to a new job, they come with 5 years of experience and very commonly may actually have made more money. I'm just going to adjust this a little bit because I seem to be getting color shift a little bit here. It's just the lens. I'm going to wipe my thumb over it. Hold on. There, maybe I had some dust or something. I did it in the last video too, and I wasn't sure why. Anyway, so we have that opportunity that we can take our current experience and go to another job, in that case like the server, right? But we never do that. And a lot of it is because of that sense of apathy, right? That sense of, who am I to do this? And that's not a good thing because we sell ourselves out. And then what a surprise that when we sell ourselves out, it leads to depression. Because you can't have sadness for a long period of time and not have a cost to pay. I did a write-up years ago that I never actually put out because of the devastation that it could have on the politics of injury and illness and stuff. But if you really stop to look at it, one of my thoughts was that if you go to work every day and your thought is, fuck, I hate this job. You go to work every day, fuck, I hate this job. You go to work every day, fuck, I hate this job. Eventually something's going to happen. Because the balance point has to be there, right? You've now said, I hate this job, right? You've now said it so much that it's become this mantra of my life sucks. And so it's not uncommon that people become depressed, maybe get hurt at work, maybe something like, some of the things with fibromyalgia. Not all, because there's other points to that, but some. Right? Like, I think, even looking at fibromyalgia for a second, because it's like the repetitive strain, how much is your body just gives up, right? Like, so you get injured, and instead of healing the injury or dealing with it, it just goes, fuck it. I hate being here anyway. Let it go. And it gets worse, right? We don't, like I said before, when we're talking about our bodies and stuff, we really don't know very much about them. Right? Most of our knowledge has been luck and technology that we've discovered what we have. We really don't understand the interplay and the intermix, and we don't understand the mind at all. We understand the brain a very little bit, but, how do we know that that doesn't occur, right? It's not to say that that is your fault, but you contribute to it. And that's where I think most people get really upset about depression, is because there's no accountability towards it, right? There's no, like with everything else, there's no exploration to understand why it's there. And one of the reasons is so we don't have to be accountable. Because if we explore and we find out it is our fault, at least in part, then we are to blame. And we don't do all or nothing, or we don't do half measures. We do all or nothing. If I'm to blame this much, I'm to blame this much. And that's not good, right? It's all part of that control and judgment and all this other garbage. So, but we have to take account of that, right? We have to look at going, okay, so is my depression based on my life, my history, my situation, or is my depression something I truly have no control over? You have very little control over it in situational as well, but you can gain control over it once you understand, right? Because like I said, if it's neurochemical, you can't fix it. There's no way that you can go in unless you have special superpowers that can mess with your brain. Right? You really can't tweak it out in yourself. Like, there's techniques and processes, and there'll be many more developed in the future that allow us to do that, but that's external. But the biggest component is our relationship to it, right? Because if we look at it as a sign of weakness, if we look at it as a sign of stupidity, we look at it as that we're dumb for doing it, if we're looking at it as unacceptable, again, it creates that big cycle. And with something like depression, it isn't just here once in a while. It's all the time. So like that compounding impact of work, you're constantly telling yourself, this sucks, this is bad, I'm horrid, this is garbage. It eventually creates a defect or creates an impact because of the deficit that we're creating on our emotional health. But if we're willing to accept that we have some control over it, not all, just some, and we're prepared to admit that our feelings are a component of it and look at them and change our relationship to them, so that now instead of being depressed as a nasty, horrible monster that should never, ever, ever, ever be looked at, we can go, okay, you're not my best friend, but you are okay, right? Because once it's okay, then we can talk about it, we can look at it, we can change it. That's a hard process because we have to be willing to look at our history. We have to be looking at our part of the grand scheme of things. And like I said with my thought on fibromyalgia, if you've set yourself up for this long negative walk that led to this outcome, that causes a lot of internal conflict because we basically have to justify that history, right? Which is another reason we don't look at it, because we don't want to pay for it. The reality is we've already paid for it. We pay for it every day, and we continue to pay for it every day. By looking at it and understanding it and defining it and changing our relationship to us, we actually can change what we're paying for it. Instead of paying, 1,000 units of energy, if you will, we could pay 300, right? And then we can lower it over time. But we're already paying for it. We're not going to pay for it new by understanding it. It's already there, right? All of our problems, all of our issues, all of our dysfunctions are there. We're paying for them every day. It's only by understanding them that we can change them and then lessen them and not pay for them anymore. This idea that we have to then pay for them is ludicrous. It's just a defense mechanism that we've created that says, don't look at that. Because again, we created that history of unacceptability, right? And as issues, as I've kind of mentioned a little bit here and there, issues are one of those things that every time you touch, it gets bigger because it has to defend itself. So we have to figure out a way to look at depression in a way that doesn't trigger the issues, because then it grows. And the best thing that we can do is simply make it acceptable, right? It's okay I'm depressed. It's okay that I'm sad. It's okay that I'm not feeling well. Doesn't mean I'm happy with it. It doesn't mean I'm now going to settle and that's good enough, but it makes it okay. Then we can have the discussion with ourselves. We can talk about it. And that's where, in a lot of ways, it is good to go to somebody like a psychologist or psychiatrist. The unfortunate reality is they're not in for a cure. They're in for acceptable, right? Once that's one of the issues I have with them, is that their goal isn't to ever have you stop, right? If you start, you're expected to basically go for the rest of your life. And that's not always a bad thing if you get the benefit from it. But even stereotypically, even in movies and TVs and other people we've talked to, like even in our own separate lives, often it doesn't have an impact, right? You might go for a little while and feel a little better and then quit. But because they don't have an end goal on recovery, an end goal on change, that's the problem. But to have somebody to talk to, that's a good one. That's where it's really good sometimes to find other venues. Like we've got life coaches, we've got counselors, we've got there's all sorts of non-profit organizations that are dedicated to stuff. Like I know here in my community and most, I think it's most of the country, we have things like Families First, which is a non-profit that really focuses on people. And there's a big stigma around them that they're for the poor people. They're not. They're about promoting family values and family structure and helping people deal with those problems, right? Whether it's finance, whether it's emotion, whether it's parenting skills, and they're really, really good at it, but it's got that stigma, right? Which is essentially the same with depression and a lot of the other illnesses that potentially may come from a lot of the same stuff, right? Is that it's not acceptable, right? And that's one of the big things we have to talk about. And I know years ago, they actually had a radio ad that they were trying to work on making depression normal, because it is, right? To stop people hiding from it, right? Like we used to go from a situation looking at our darker side of humanity, not even that long ago, like probably even just like 50 years back. If you had someone in your family that had a mental illness or was born mentally deficient in some way, was born deformed, born whatever, right? If they weren't normal, I hate that word, then they got stuck in an asylum and left there, right? And we have hundreds of years of history of doing that. It only changed more recently, thankfully, in that sense, with the discovery of psychology and stuff, because that's what sort of changed that world. So they're not a bad thing. A lot of the neurochemicals that, the true depressives, the neurochemical depressives need came because of them. So they're not a bad thing. They're really not. It's just how you use them. And like everything, it's a tool. If you gain benefit from it, then it's of benefit. If you gain nothing from it, then it's of detriment, because you're not getting, you have to pay. It's not free. So if you're gaining nothing, you really are losing, because you're losing your money. And while not a big thing in the grand scheme of the universe, it still is a thing. So we need to kind of get this topic being less shameful, right? We need to stop pretending that depression is a negative thing, but we also need to separate the types of depression, right? Because if everybody assumes that we have all this stuff and it's the same thing, it's wrong. As an example, I'm going to switch to a slight different topic for a minute, but we have all these people that are claiming to be celiac. Now, for those that don't know, celiac means that you have an allergic reaction to gluten. Allergic. What that means is that in your intestines, there's these little hair, I think they're called celi or feli or something like that, I don't remember. But when you get celiac, it destroys all those hairs. And you can eat food all you want, but your body loses its ability to take up those nutrients. So you will actually starve to death. The good thing is it comes back over time. The bad thing is it takes time. So people that have a celiac reaction end up in the hospital on things like IV, because they can't digest through their normal system, right? Their intestines just will not absorb food, will not absorb nutrients. So, thankfully we have a treatment, but there is no cure, right? It's just, and maybe because the treatment isn't really horrific, it's just like IV solution. Unfortunately, constantly, I don't think they can just do it at like 1 or 2 times a day. I think you have to stay there and constantly get the IV drip. But that's not horrendous, like compared to something like chemotherapy, which is really detrimental to the body, right? So I don't know if it's ever going to be given enough to really focus on a cure. But we have all these people who are claiming to be, gluten intolerant or celiacs that have no understanding what that even means, right? And there's a big difference between somebody who eats gluten and gets gas, right, and someone who eats gluten and dies. But because all of these people kind of put themselves in the same barrel, it means that celiacs goes from being this really important thing to look at and make sure we're careful of because people will die from it, to becoming socially meh, because everybody's got it. And that's a big problem, because you're basically discounting all the people who actually have a problem with all these people who have a mental problem. And I mean, literally, not a neurochemical, it's mental, that they don't like this. And there's so much misinformation that it waters down what celiac is. And that's dangerous, because people can die from that, right? Same with allergies. Allergy leads to death, not leads to uncomfort. Right? So all these people talk about, well, I have a milk allergy. I'm intolerant. No, you're intolerant. It's not an allergy. Right? Allergy means things like anaphylaxis, which means your throat swells up and you cannot breathe. It means things like, I had an allergic reaction, which was an entire full body rash from my head to my toe. That was just one of the worst experiences of my life. I discovered they make pills that are that big. That's what I had to take for the things. It was this tiniest little pill I ever seen in my life. And but that was an allergic reaction, right? That's allergic. Gas, uncomfort, burping, that's not allergic. That's intestinal, right? That's intolerant. And it's important because it waters it down, right? So same with depression. If we're covering all of these situational depressions, if we're covering emotional depression because we broke up with somebody, if we're covering neurochemical depression and calling it all depression, then depression gets watered down. It gets put to a point that it's like, both a combination of everybody's got it and who cares. And that doesn't help. Right? Because it doesn't talk about it. It doesn't get it open in the open. It doesn't get it discussed. And then it becomes a competition, right? Well, I've got depression. No, I've got more depression. No, I've got more depression. What a stupid thing to do. But yet it happens every day, because that's how we're competitive that way, right? And we water all this stuff down. We don't understand it. We don't take any time to investigate it. We just take it at face value. But yet, like I said before, if a person is involved, then we get judgmental about it. But because we water stuff down, we're still being judgmental about it, right? We're saying that it's not that big a deal. It's not that critical. And it's amazing in food service, especially, like we talk about the peanut allergy all the time, but there's a lot of people that get the training, that understand this stuff and then don't really care about it because it's been watered down so much that they think, for perfect example, is that, like when I was in food service, it wasn't necessarily uncommon to see somebody just sort of wipe down their area and then go and make whatever the thing was without that. Like if it was a peanut allergy, right? Just wash your cutting board and then go get whatever you're making and use it on the cutting board without worrying about it because now your area is clean. Well, it's not. When I was in there, if I came across somebody that had an allergy, I would finish all the work that I needed to get done immediately, and then I would actually wash everything. Right? I would wash the counter, I'd get a new cutting board, I'd get a new knife if I needed, I'd change my apron so that guaranteed nothing ever transferred over. But I would never ever do that with something else, even if there was no nuts in it, because it was just that, because I understand how deadly it can be, right? I've thankfully, my allergic reaction was the full body rash. Apparently I had anaphylaxis when I was a baby, but that was from penicillin, so we don't play with that. So, we got to understand that there's a difference, and they are different. And in situational depression, if you're willing to accept that it's not your fault, it's just this history that's been created. If you're willing to admit that it's okay, then you can think about it, you can talk about it, you can look to change it. And as I said, you're already paying for it. You're not going to pay more for it by dealing with it. You're going to pay less. You're going to feel better. You're going to feel relief. You're going to feel superior to what you do now. And like I said in the last video, the walking on the floor exercise, that is a good one if you're depressed, because you're going to see those moods. You're going to see those emotions. And I've known many people that have been depressed, and it always amazed me. One of the ways you can look at situational depression, one of the keys to it, is that you can find the fun things that you like to do and actually get enjoyment from them. Maybe not as much as you used to, but still get some. In neurochemical depression, it doesn't matter how much fun you're having. It doesn't matter how much you love it. You get nothing from it. And that's the difference. But you have to be honest with yourself, because I've seen many people who claim to be like neurochemically depressed who have fun when they're doing something. That doesn't mean you can never have fun, because that's the nature of the depression. It has that cycle to it. But you can't go from depressed to then go do something fun and then not be as depressed, because the cycle has no care what you're doing in neurochemical depression, right? If you can map your cycle, that's awesome. But generally it's not systematic. It's just random. And I think because oftentimes with neurochemical depression also comes situational depression. So the two combine, but you can change the neurochemical depression by going and seeing a psychologist, a psychiatrist, and getting the help. Going to them for all the situational depressions, they might be able to help, but I don't think it's going to work, because as I said, like if they're giving you a drug meant to increase your neurochemical transmitter output, and you have no reduction, I don't know if that's going to be okay. That may actually be harmful, because it may overwhelm your system, and then your system actually cuts off the production of the neurochemical transmitter, and then you actually become depressed, right? So then you become stuck on the meds because you made yourself depressed because you took the meds. I don't know, right? And realistically, neither do they. They'll claim they know, because that's the same thing, right? We have to be that superior. If I'm the expert, I need to be the expert. What we assume with celebrities, a lot of people do, because that's, again, the standard that we set, right? So if this is the celebrity version and I'm the reality version, I have to be just as good or better. So we get that sense that I have to know. You don't. And as I've said before, we're terrified of not knowing the answer. And so we get into this cycle. But we have to acknowledge that, right? That we don't know, and that's okay. So I think that would be the best thing. If you feel like you're depressed, if you feel like you don't like your situation, the first thing is honestly and openly look at what you can do to change. And because almost all of it stems to job. I mean, there's very little depression that doesn't. Alcohol, drugs, sex, demented family life usually interconnects with job, because the job is where we get a lot of our identity from, right? Like you ask somebody what they are, you don't hear who they are, you hear their job title is the first thing out of their mouth, right? When you go up to somebody and, hey, what are you? And their first thing is, well, I'm an alcoholic. No, it's like, I'm an engineer, I'm a medic, I'm a doctor, I'm a scientist. Their job title is the first thing out of their mouth, and literally generally stops at the job title, right? Because you never hear people say, well, I'm a parent, that comes only if you say, well, no, who are you? Then those alternative words come out. But if you're in a situation that you don't like, if you're not trying to change it, then to be blunt, that's your fault because you're not trying to change it. The fact that you think you can't is your problem. So if you're in a job you don't like, put out resumes and see what happens. If nothing comes back from it, and you have been open and honestly looking, because it's easy to lie to ourselves, right? It's easy to go say, okay, well, I put out 3 resumes on Monday, and I put out 2 resumes on Friday, so I've been putting out resumes all week. You put out 5 resumes. Doesn't matter when you did it. If I put out 85 resumes in one day and nothing the rest of the week, that's far, far, far more effective than putting out 10 resumes on the first day and 30 on the second day and then forgetting it, right? Because that's only 40 resumes versus 85. So you have to be open and honest. You have to put in that work. And if your desire to change your life is that you're putting a half-assed effort into putting out resumes, that tells you a tremendous amount of your opinion of yourself because you're not worth the effort, right? And that is a video I should do as a separate one because that's a big, big, big topic itself too. And I think I don't think I'll have a chance to do it next because my son's going to get up pretty soon. But maybe I'll try and do that next. But so our relationship with all of this is a big component, right? If we're not worthy of putting an effort to go find a new job, then what a surprise that we're not going to try and find a new job. What a surprise we're going to hate our lives because we know we sold ourselves out. But we're not allowed to look at that. So then comes these justifications and issues and control points to make it okay to be crappy to ourselves, right? Which of course is going to lead you where? Depression. So we got to get out of that cycle. We got to say, okay, you know what? It's okay to be depressed. It just means we don't like our lives. That's the marker, right? Like what better marker is there that life sucks than you're depressed, right? That's a historical evolution thing, right? You don't start out depressed. You know, there are kids because of the neurochemical depression who start out depressed and ding, they're depressed. They're neurochemically depressed. We know that because they started out that way. Easy to identify in that sense, right? So we know that that's not situational, but we know situational is going to evolve with them over time. So there's a good marker. If you were depressed as a kid, there's a good chance, and not like a later kid, like, 8 or 10, because by then a lot of kids get depressed, right? It's just the situation we find ourselves in is counter to good human, right? Telling ourselves we're not allowed to talk, we're not allowed to think, we're not allowed to ask questions, we're not allowed to have feelings. That's depressing, right? You can't, that's one of the reasons we need to talk about it, is because realistically, there isn't anybody that isn't depressed, right? Most people are depressed for the same reason, and there's a few that are depressed for other reasons, but typically most people are depressed. That's why I think, like I said, it gets watered down so much. But if we accept that, this is something that we can now control, this is something we can deal with, and if it's as simple as finding a better job and putting ourselves out there looking for a relationship, as I keep saying, as I said specifically in one of the other videos, 99.999% of the world's population are wonderful, amazing people. It's us that closes off from them. It's us that is hiding from them. So, but that's where most of depression lies at the end of the day, is jobs and relationships. Because we don't like our job and we hate ourselves, so what a surprise we don't find a good relationship. But all of that is changeable. It sucks to go through that transition because we tell ourselves we don't like change. Well, I hate to tell you, we change constantly. There is no part of us that is the same as it was. If it was, we would never grow beyond being a newborn baby. We would never exist in the first place because we couldn't even be a newborn baby. We change all the time. Our ideas change, our opinions change, our likes changes, our desires change. We just don't admit to any of it, but we do it all the time. So if you look at it honestly and say, okay, I don't like my job, I can go find a new job. And if you're not putting in the effort, that tells you about yourself, right? If you don't like your relationship or you're not in one and you don't put yourself out there to find one, same issue you're hearing is I'm not worth it. And if you look at people and talk to them, and even yourselves, if you're honest, that's the number one answer given to everything. So I'm not worth it. Who am I? Well, you're an amazing human being. You are a vital and important component of life. Without you, the world would not be the same. Right? It doesn't mean you're better than everybody else. It doesn't mean you're less than everybody else. It means we're all the same in a sense. We're all equal in different ways. And I will talk about that interconnectedness, and you'll see that, right? There is nothing that there's not a single thing that any of us can do, no matter who we are or what we are, that doesn't involve a billion other people. Not one thing. Even me talking involves hundreds of thousands, if not billions of people to make it happen because of everything being so interconnected. But we don't look at that because we don't want to. The more we don't want to, the more we're going to be depressed because we're selling ourselves out. We're telling ourselves we're not good enough. We're not worthy. We're not able. And again, then we label that with that unacceptability. And it creates this dichotomy too, because you have this unacceptability of unacceptability, right? It's unacceptable to label this as unacceptable, but I'm still doing it. So then it creates that even bigger cycle that makes it even bigger and bigger and bigger. And gee, are we really surprised we're that depressed as a society? But if we can change it, that's the key. If there is a way to change it that does not involve medication, because as I said just a little bit in the video ago, that may actually be more harmful than it's worth. We just don't know. There just hasn't been enough studies to know that, right? Most people don't start you on a med after investigating your neurotransmitter levels and then chart the progress over time. That just doesn't happen. I mean, I think some of that is nobody probably thought about it, and some of it is I don't know how invasive that would be. I imagine it's got to be pretty, because I don't think you can get to the chemicals in your brain through just normal bloodstream. I don't know. So, we don't know. But we can change it just by observing ourselves. So walking on the floor, the technique in the last video, is a good way to do that. Because if you see yourself doing what you're doing, then you can change it. If you make it okay, then you can talk about it. You can listen to it. You can change it. You can make it your own. And the more you do that, you get rid of those issues. And as I keep saying, and I'll say it many times again, having everything crumble is one of the best things you can do for yourself. I wish beyond doubt that I could have an ability just to walk up to somebody and go, boop, touch their forehead and just have their whole world collapse. That to me would be the greatest thing anybody could ever do to somebody. They have to know it's coming. It can't just be some stranger on the street. But I would love to have an ability to have like a clinic or something where you could actually do that to somebody. Just go, boop. And in some ways that's where having that sense of amnesia, if it ever happens, may actually be a good thing, because you get rid of all of that stuff, even in temporary form, right? I would love to see if the people that had like big term amnesia that actually lasted for a while, so that they develop this sort of new personality in place of the old, if they get to keep some of that new stuff, or if it just disappears back in their old stuff. I actually have never thought of that until just now, because it never occurred to me. So one of the benefits I get about talking is I learn new things too. So hopefully that gives you something to look at. Look at yourself. Be willing to accept you for who you are, whatever that means. Don't rate it and judge it and control it. Just accept it. And then you can talk about it. Then you can control it and change it. And the more you do of that, the less you're going to feel bogged down, the less you're going to feel worthless, the less you're going to feel weighed down, the less you're going to hate your life, and the happier you're going to be, the less depressed you're going to be, right? And if you need that help because you are neurochemically depressed, get the help. Don't sit back and wait. I have a good friend of mine that's like that, because she unfortunately was a drug addict in earlier life. She won't go and get the drugs. And it's wrecking her life because she's just afraid of a pill. It's not a thing that makes you high. It's not a thing that changes your life. It just changes your neurochemical balance. And it's a big thing. It really is. So don't be afraid to talk about it. Find somebody that you can talk to, even if it's a group on YouTube or on Facebook, right? Talk about it. You don't have to talk about it to your friends and family if you don't feel comfortable with that. But there's a billion other people out there that have the same problem and are willing to talk about it. You just have to find them. Whether that's a community group, whether that's online, it doesn't matter. What matters is that there's other people who are living, breathing people that you're sharing it with and learning from. That's the big thing. So I'm going to leave it at that. Hopefully that gives you a lot to think about. And I would recommend, with a lot of these videos, it's good to go back and watch them again later, because just the way we learn, we don't always pick up everything. I've done this before, and I've had a book that I wrote and stuff, and I've had it where the people that have had it have actually said like they've reread it like 5 years later, 10 years later, and got all new stuff from it, because we change all the time. So going back and revisiting these things is a good idea, because then we get new insights, we get new ideas, and it helps us remember what we didn't necessarily remember, right? Because I'm giving you 1,000 points of information every minute. How could you possibly remember them all? I certainly can't. Nobody can. So don't expect yourself to. right? That's a big part of everything. Just be you. Whatever that means, no matter how unacceptable you pretend that it is, it's not. It's okay. So I'm going to stop there. Again, thank you for listening, and I'll see you in the next one.